Welcome back to the Running Wine Mom podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Cieslinski, aka the Running Wine Mom. Today, we're diving into a topic that's emotional, challenging, and deeply important: how to talk to our children about death. Unfortunately, in the last few days, we lost my brother-in-law's dad, and this really kind of brought up some questions about how do we talk to our children about this, whether it's my sister and brother-in-law's kids or even our kids. And as parents, we do our best to protect our children, but when death touches families or even communities, it's crucial to help them understand and process grief in a healthy way. So in today's episode, I'm going to guide you through how to explain death to kids at different developmental stages from infants up to teens. Because as someone who has a 2-year-old, and my sister and brother-in-law also have a 2-year-old, so how do you explain it to them? You know, Willow is almost 4, and then their other son is 5. So we have a little wide array. But then I also see, at the high school level, when kids lose someone. I mean, someone in my class today lost their cat and had to leave. So it's something that you need to know, and it's not something to avoid. And that's kind of how we were brought up, with avoidance, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I'm going to share strategies on how we as parents can also manage our own grief while caring for our little ones. Plus, we'll look at the science of grief, what actually happens in our brains and bodies when we experience loss. So pour yourself a glass of wine or lace up your running shoes and let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to start with is understanding grief and what actually happens to your brain and body. Before we talk about how to support our kids through grief, let's first understand what happens inside us when we experience loss. So whether you're 2 or 62, grief is going to affect us both at a neurological level and a physical level. So here's what happens to our brain and our body during grief. Let's start with our brain and grief. There's going to be a neurological response. When someone we love dies, our brain experiences a significant change as well. The part of the brain associated with attachment, the limbic system, especially the hippocampus and the amygdala, they register the loss as a form of emotional pain. So this can lead to really, heightened stress response. Grief also is going to trigger the production of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and that's going to make us feel overwhelmed and disconnected. I know that this weekend I definitely felt I was off on parenting because of the grief that I was trying to experience, and my stress levels were through the roof. Like, it takes me a lot to kind of lose my shit when I am parenting, and I lost it like more than ever on Saturday, and I felt really guilty about it. Doing this research really kind of reminded me that everything that was happening is normal, and unfortunately, it can just happen. Next, let's talk about the role of memory. The hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, that plays a major role in grief. And when someone dies, our brain may replay memories, both good and bad, which is really a part of how we process loss. And this is why you might feel certain moments come flooding back after a loss, like something that you have not thought of in 15 years. And again, that's something that I was going through, thinking of all of the events that Rick was at, all of the things that he did. He gave me a lottery ticket at Christmas, which I still haven't cashed, and I haven't thought about it in almost a year now. And I can't imagine what my sister and brother-in-law and the rest of their family is going through. So it's totally normal again. The next thing is physical impact of grief. So you're going to have the fatigue and exhaustion. The body's reaction to grief can really manifest as deep fatigue, as our brain is working hard to really process the loss. So sleep disturbances, whether insomnia or sleeping too much, are also really common. Next, we'll talk about the immune system. Studies show that grieving can really temporarily weaken your immune system, making you more susceptible to illness. This is kind of the body's way of signaling that you need to take extra care of yourself. Grief can really affect the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain which is responsible for decision making and emotional regulation. And this is why people in mourning might experience mood swings, difficult focusing, and the feeling of numb or disconnected. It's all part of the brain's reaction. So how does the body release grief? How do we release it? We don't really think about releasing grief in a physical way, but we know the ways that it is released. And, the first is tears. Crying is really the physical release of emotion, and they're triggered by sadness. They contain stress hormones and toxins, which is why a good cry really often feels cathartic. The next is movement. Exercise and movement can really help regulate the flood of stress hormones that grief releases. Simple activities like walking or running can really give your brain the oxygen and endorphins that it needs to help stabilize your emotions, which is why I find comfort in running when I'm processing hard emotions. I know I've talked about that before. Whether you're angry or you're sad, or you're happy, movement really can help you. If you're feeling like you just can't focus on anything after a loss, it's not just in your head, because grief literally affects your ability to think clearly. It's a natural response. So just, give yourself time. Now let's get into how to talk about loss. We're going to start with the youngest. We're going to start with infants and toddlers, so 0 to about 2 years old. We're going to start with the little ones. While children under 2, they really can't understand death cognitively, they are deeply affected by the emotional atmosphere that's around them. So babies are really incredibly sensitive to the feelings of their caregivers. They can sense sadness, they can sense tension, and the absence, even if they don't have words for it, they can still sense it. So it's important to really try and include them in the process of grief. And some ways that you can support them through this is, keeping a routine. Infants and toddlers, they really thrive on routine. And if there's been a major loss, try to keep daily routines as consistent as possible. Even small disruptions, they can feel overwhelming for them. So try and keep them on regular naps, feeding schedule, comforting them during bedtime rituals. That's all going to help them to stay in control of themselves. And, if you, I will talk about later, if you as a caregiver can't take control of yourself dealing with emotion, having your children in a routine is going to keep them kind of a little bit more in line, and therefore going to help you to deal with grief a little bit better. Obviously, physical comfort with them. Infants respond to physical reassurance. So holding them, cuddling them, carrying them as much as possible. Your touch is going to provide that sense of safety for them. A lot of us kind of retreat during when we are trying to grieve, but making sure that we're going to them for comfort. And we know that those babies are the best cuddlers, and they can give us the comfort that we also need. So answering their grief, while children this age, they won't ask questions directly, but they may become fussier or have trouble sleeping, and they may not understand the loss, but again, they're going to feel that emotional absence. So for example, if your toddler keeps looking for your deceased family member, you can say something like, "Grandma isn't here anymore, but we can still think about her and talk about how much we loved her." So being simple, being honest. Toddlers showing their grief in their bodies, it might manifest physically through regressions, maybe in potty training or eating habits, or through extra clinginess. And again, just being patient and offering them reassurance. So now let's move on to preschoolers age 2 to 5. And that's really the age range that my family was kind of working with. And we were all kind of trying to figure out, what do we do? What do we say? How are they even going to understand this? But children at this age, they are just kind of beginning to understand the world. And they may view death as reversible or like temporary. They may think of death in terms of sleeping, or believe the person maybe will come back. So how can we support them through this grief? Concrete, simple explanations. So use clear and simple language, but avoid phrases like "they went to sleep" or "they went away," because this can really confuse them and cause fear of sleep or abandonment, really. I know the way that I kind of talked to Willow about it was, we watched movies. She was talking about Moana and how the grandmom died. And, she told my husband, well, the grandma didn't go to heaven. She went under a blanket. So she was thinking literal. And whether you believe in an afterlife or not, we do. So we kind of said, well, Pop-Up Rick is in heaven. And my daughter couldn't really make that connection, but then we talked a little bit about the Lion King and the circle of life. And that was a little helpful as well, because we said that Simba's dad was in the sky and we saw him in the clouds, and we just got back from flying. And so we kind of talked about heaven being up there. And again, this is going to be very individual for each family, but that's kind of what worked for us. Also, we know with everything, repetition works with young children, so it's not going to be any different in grief. Young children, they really need to hear things multiple times to understand. So be prepared for them to be asking repetitive questions like, where did they go? Or will they come back? And even though you've answered it, they may still ask you multiple times. Creative expression at this age, children in this age group, they express emotions through play and art. So providing opportunities for them to draw, to role play, or like use toys to work through their emotions, that's really helpful. So let's talk about answering their questions. So I know, again, these were kind of questions that my daughter asked. So what does dead mean? That's the biggest thing. And that was the scariest thing, because I know I didn't want to say, well, like, it's when someone's old, because we know that's not really true as well. The way to explain it, what death is very simple. The definition: when someone dies, their body stops working. So they don't breathe, they don't eat, they don't move anymore. It means we won't see them again, but we can remember them in our hearts. A very simple definition, not going too far into it. And you really don't have to go into exactly the details of what happened, depending on what it is, because again, this can kind of cause fear in them. And then they're going to ask you, where did they go? And the answer to that we kind of said was, when people die, they don't come back, but we can still love them and remember all the happy times that we shared. So here's an example. If your child asks, like, when is grandma coming back? You could respond gently just by saying, grandma isn't coming back because when someone dies, their body stops working, but we can still look at pictures of her and talk about her whenever you want. So that would be an easy response to tell your toddler. Again, they may respond to grief at this age in different ways through their body. You might notice physical reaction to grief, like they could start to have stomach aches, change in appetite, or even, again, regression in behavior like bedwetting or thumb sucking. And these are all normal responses to stress. So, don't get too stressed about that. Next, we're going to talk about school-age children. So maybe like 6 to 10 years old. So children age 6 to 10, they have more of a concrete understanding of death, and they start to really grasp that death is final. But this realization can really bring up new fears, like worrying about their own death or the death of other loved ones. So how can we support this grief in them? First is just having open conversations. School-age children are curious and they might have a lot of detailed questions. So encourage open conversation. Let them know it's okay to talk about the person who died. And it's okay to cry or to be upset as well. You also want to provide reassurance, because this age group, they may start to develop anxieties about safety and death. So reassure them that death doesn't happen to everyone all at once, and that most people live long, healthy lives. You could do creative memorials, encourage them to find ways to memorialize the person who died. And this could be through a memory box. It could be through creating art or writing stories about a loved one. Those are all really helpful. So let's talk about answering questions that these kids, this age group, 6 to 10, may start asking. So first is, why did they die? A simple answer would be, sometimes people die when they get very sick or when their body can't work anymore. It's no one's fault, and it's something that happens to everyone eventually. At this age, they might ask, will I die too? And you can simply answer, yes, one day, but most people live for a very long time. So right now you are safe, and we're doing everything to keep you healthy. And so that's going to be a great reassurance for them that you are there and you're doing everything to keep them healthy, and putting the perspective of that. So now let's do a little example. If a child asks, what happens when you die? You could simply say, different people believe different things. Some people believe in heaven. Some people believe in being remembered by those they love. And we can think about what feels right for you. So again, if you are someone who believes in heaven or the afterlife, but maybe your kids don't, that's okay too. It can kind of be an opportunity for them to kind of start thinking, do they believe in heaven? Do they believe in an afterlife? Or do they believe in reincarnation? Oh, it's conversations that you can have. Next, we're going to talk about grief in the body for this age group. It may show up in trouble concentrating at school, stomach aches, or even really behavioral changes like withdrawing from friends. So again, encourage physical activity to help manage some of the stress that grief puts on the body. And at this age, they could probably do some journaling as well, or drawing or coloring. That would be helpful to kind of get some of that stress out of their body. Next, we're going to talk about preteens, ages 10 through 12, and they're really beginning to grapple with more complex emotions. We know that that age group is very emotional to begin with, but when there's death involved, they may start to ask deeper and essential questions about the meaning of life and death. They're also likely to internalize their grief, or they're also either internalize their grief or express it through anger, isolation, or even rebellion. So watch out for those signs. So how can we support their grief? First is validating their emotions. Let them know what they're feeling is normal, because preteens, they may feel embarrassed by their grief or unsure how to express it. Remind them that crying or feeling angry is okay. I actually remember when I was in fourth grade, I had a classmate pass away from cancer, and no one really sat me down. Maybe they did. I don't know. But I don't remember anyone sitting me down. I remember going to the viewing with my mom and one of her friends, and we just like walked through. And then I remember dropping my mom's friend off, and then I started crying. But like, there wasn't any real conversation around it. I think my parents kind of just like didn't know how to deal with it maybe themselves. But I think that kind of is something that maybe stuck with me, and I still have a hard time dealing with grief. So use it as an opportunity to really like validate them and spend extra time with them, but also give them space for reflection, because preteens, they may prefer to grieve privately. Allow them time to process their feelings alone, but make it clear you're available if they want to talk. And again, that's kind of hard because like I said, like maybe that's what my parents were doing. They were giving me space, but I didn't really know how to verbalize that I needed to talk about it. And that was something that was kind of lost in that moment. You can also begin to like find meaning, because preteens, they might want to explore the larger meaning of life and death. So encourage discussions about spirituality, personal beliefs, and what they think really happens after death, because they may not want concrete answers, but instead they need a space to explore their thoughts about what exactly is happening. So let's talk about answering their questions. So they may ask, why do people die, at this age as well? And you can say people die when their bodies stop working, whether it's because of sickness, old age, or accidents. Death is a part of life, even though it's hard to understand. So as you can see, these answers are getting a little bit more in depth as the kids get older, and you can give them more of an age appropriate answer and go more into depth as they age, because they can understand it. Something else, which I still think about sometimes, what's the point of living if we all die? And the way that you can answer it, that's a question that many people ask. And for some, life is about enjoying moments with the people that we love, and others find purpose in helping others or creating things that last, like art or writing. But I also think it's an opportunity to kind of say, like, that's a great question. So here's an example of a kind of conversation that you can have. So if your preteen says, why should I care about anything if everyone dies? You might respond, I understand that thinking about death can make it feel like life is unfair, but many people find that life is about what we do while we're here. And then that can give you the opportunity to open up the door to say, what gives you a sense of purpose? And really, I think that's what the whole point of us being here is finding a sense of purpose. So it's a great opportunity to kind of ask your child to start thinking about that as well. At this age, their body may respond to grief as well. They may show it through withdrawal, physical complaints like headache or stomach ache, or even through acting out. So again, encourage physical outlets like sports or walking or art / creative activities to kind of help them release their pent-up emotions. Next, let's talk about teens. So age is like 13 to 18. Teens have a much more developed understanding of death, but that doesn't necessarily make it easier for them to cope. So they may try to suppress their emotions or distance themselves from the family to kind of process things alone. So how can we support their grief? First, you do want to allow them to have their independence because teens are likely to want space to grieve on their own terms. So let them process their feelings in their own way, but also remind them that you're always available for a conversation if they need it. Next is encourage healthy outlets. So teens may express grief through creative or physical outlets like writing, music, art, or exercise, and encourage them to really engage in these activities as a way to channel their emotions. You can also use this as an opportunity to discuss about life's meanings. Many teens, they may question the purpose of life and death and encourage open-ended discussions where they can explore these without judgment. Some questions that they may ask: what happens when we die? And you can, again, respond. Different people believe different things. Some think we go to heaven. Some believe in reincarnation, and others believe we live on through the memories of those who loved us. Another question that a lot of teens may ask: why do bad things happen to good people? Simple answer: that's one of life's hardest questions. Sometimes things happen that are outside of our control, and it's okay to feel upset or confused. And then simply ask them, what do you think about that? And they're either going to say, I don't know, or they may have some sort of response to it, but it's something to ask them. So here's an example. If your teen asks, how am I supposed to move on? You might respond, grief takes time and there's no right way to move forward. It's okay to take things one day at a time and to feel sad, angry, or confused along the way. Teens may also have physical and emotional responses. They may suppress their grief, which that can result in emotional numbness or risky behaviors at this age. So be mindful of this and provide a safe environment for them to talk openly or to engage in positive activities that help release built up emotions. All right, so the last part that we're going to kind of talk about is how parents can grieve while managing young children, because I know that was something that my sister and I talked about. Their 2-year-old was very needy, obviously, over the time that they're trying to grieve, and you're trying to process this, but also your kid needs a snack or your kid needs this, and it doesn't give you that extended period of time, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 days. It just depends on what you need to kind of reflect, and you may kind of lose that moment. So really one of the hardest parts of losing someone is navigating our own grief while we're still caring for our kids. We might feel overwhelmed, we might feel exhausted, we might feel emotionally drained, yet our children still need us to guide them through their own grief. So it's a delicate balance, and it's really essential to remember that you don't have to be perfect in this process because you're just figuring it out as well. So some tips for managing your grief while you're caring for kids, the simple, what everybody says in parenthood in general, but self-care is really essential. You will probably feel guilty about focusing on yourself, but it is vital for both you and your kids. So even if it's just a simple short walk, maybe journaling, taking a couple moments to breathe, any small act of self-care is going to help you cope a little bit more. Be honest about your feelings. It's okay to let your children see you grieve. Like, you do not have to be strong for them. By modeling healthy grief, you're teaching them that it's normal to be sad or emotional after a loss. So you can say things like, I'm feeling really sad because I miss grandpa, and that's okay. You don't have to be strong in this moment. And it's great, just like we like to our kids to see us make mistakes, it's okay to let them see you grieve because that's how they learn. Next is ask for help. Lean on your support system, whether it's family, friends, or even a grief counselor. It's okay to ask for help when you need it. You don't have to do this alone. Balancing your needs and theirs. So understand that you and your child might grieve in different ways. You might need quiet time while your child wants to play or ask questions. So try to honor both your needs, finding moments for personal reflection while also being present for your child. So for example, you might say to your child, I'm feeling really sad today because I miss grandma. It's okay for us to feel sad sometimes, and we'll get through this together. Physical health and grief. So again, don't forget that grief takes a toll on your physical health too. It's easy to neglect the basic needs, sleep, nutrition, and exercise, but even small efforts like drinking enough water or getting outside, even if it's not for a walk, just getting outside, they can really make a difference. So those are some tips for that. All right. So in today's episode, we've covered a lot of ground on how children understand death at different stages of development, the physical and emotional toll of grief, and how we as parents can navigate our own grief while supporting our kids. Grieving is really hard and it really does look different for everyone. But honesty, openness, and patience, those are all ways that we can help our children and ourselves find a path through it. Remember, you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm feeling sad too, because what matters is being present, listening, and creating a safe space for your child to process the emotions. All right, so that is going to end this episode of the Running Wine Mom podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or need further resources, don't hesitate to reach out. I am going to be sharing some resources for all different age groups over the next week or two that can be really helpful and a source that one day you may use, or hopefully you won't need it anytime soon, but if you know someone who does, I really wanted to try to put some things together because, as I said, it was hard for us to try to figure out how do we do this. This is the first big death that we've had since we've had kids, and I thought that this could be beneficial for others to kind of use as well if they need some advice, because I guess that's how I grieve, is by trying to find an answer, which is not always the right way. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it. You can follow me on Instagram at @therunningwinemom_. And as I mentioned, this week I will be sharing different resources for different ages on what you can do if maybe you don't have the energy to answer all the questions. There are plenty of books, plenty of shows, plenty of ways that you can allow your kids to how to deal with grief if you don't feel like you can do it all, which is totally okay as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, you are strong, you are capable, and you are all amazing. Until next time, keep running, keep sipping, and keep enjoying life and motherhood. Cheers, and I will be back next Tuesday.